So today we have a special treat for you as we chat with the legendary Dick Pound. If you followed sports, you've definitely heard his name. Dick has done it all, from being a top-notch swimmer for Canada at the Rome 1960 Olympics
You had
to
to say that?
Huh?
You had to say
Yeah, I had to say 1960, but you were born just 10 years before, right? It was the Junior Olympics. So let's start with your swim career, Dick. So back in the day, you made waves literally, finishing sixth in the 100-meter freestyle at the Rome Olympics and helping Canada to a fourth place finish in the 4x100 medley relay. I'm saying this because we talk about Dick as, you know, his recent accomplishments, WADA and everything, but we have to remember he's an Olympian and he had quite a bit of success just a few years ago.
Well, in Montreal, I swam for McGill and the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, the MAA. But I actually started out in northern British Columbia, where my dad was an engineer in a pulp and paper company. And this is one of these things, you know, there's a dam for the river that creates a lake they use for power, and then the paper is shipped out on barges at the bottom. And they said, you know, sooner or later, every kid's going to fall in the water, either the chuck or the lake. They should know how to swim. So they took the profits from what they called the beer parlor for a number of years, and they built a 60-foot pool, 60 by 25-foot pool, covered because it was terrible weather. And instead of getting somebody just to sweep the bottom of the pool, they hired a swimming coach. And out of a kid population of maybe 400 max, there was at least one swimmer from Ocean Falls, that's the name of the place, on every Canadian team between 1948 and 1976.
Wow.
So, and I was part of that.
And you were part of that
chain, yeah.
Then you became a powerhouse in sports after your swim career. You became Secretary General and then President of the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canadian Olympic Association, I think it was called in those days. Mm-hmm. Since joining the IOC as a member in 1978, you became a real game changer. And I'm saying this really, this is true. Securing TV and sponsorship deals that brought billions into the Olympic movement. Twice you served as IOC Vice President and even ran for IOC President in 2001.
Got a bronze medal.
Got a bronze medal. I should have had gold, but that's my own private opinion. And then there's WADA. As its first president, Dick led the charge against doping, making sports fairer and cleaner. And so your dedication to integrity in sports, Dick, is unmatched. You've authored several books. You've got degrees from Concordia and McGill, where you also served as chancellor. So today we'll dive into three topics with Dick. The global and recent developments at WADA, what it takes to host Olympic Games with Paris just around the corner, and how sports arbitration is evolving for lawyers. As we know, there's a few here who have a career in sports law or would like to have a career in sports law, so we'll be addressing that as a third topic. Is that good? So welcome, Dick.
Sure. Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so let's start with WADA. This is... leave the mic here. Can you all hear us well? Yeah? Okay, good. Even in the back over there? Yeah. All right, WADA as an organization, Dick. Let's go with a hot button item. You were the founder when it was created 25 years ago. So what do you think 25 years later and where it's heading now?
Well, I think we've got the attention of everybody in the sports world on drugs and ethical competition and that sort of thing. It's far more advanced than I thought we would ever be, and bigger than I thought it would be. But it's an experiment, and this is something. A lot of the stuff that I got into, to some degree, Patrice as well, has been the result of some kind of a crisis or a problem. And you know, my former senior partner, Hewart Steichman, used to say, we thrive on chaos. That's what makes our firm good, because we can deal with chaos and you bring order out of disorder. And that was very much the same as how WADA got started. We had disqualified Ben Johnson of Canadian fame in the '88 Seoul Games, and we thought the message would go out. No matter who you are, how fantastic your performance was, what sport you're in, if you cheat at the Olympics, you're toast. And we thought that would spread through the international sport system, but it's very Eurocentric, as those of you in the sport environment know. And if it hasn't happened in Europe, it hasn't happened. So the Ben Johnson thing went almost unnoticed in Europe. It wasn't until 10 years later in the Tour de France when the Festina team is discovered with industrial quantities of EPO and doping substances and equipment, and some of their team members are arrested by the French police, that they say, oh, if this can happen in the Tour de France in cycling, which is a very important sport in Western Europe at least, it could happen to my sport. So maybe we should pay a little attention to this.
And Festina happened in 1998, if I recall, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And WADA was created a year later.
Yes.
Yeah.
What happened was that the media got very involved in the Festina thing, and Samaranch was the president of the IOC at the time, was interviewed, or he was in his hotel room in Lausanne watching the arrests and so on, shaking his head, and he says, for me, that's not doping. Doping is only if you can prove that it's dangerous to the health of the athletes. Perfectly defensible position, except it's 180 degrees from what he'd been saying as the IOC president. And so the media there was a firestorm to the point where he had to call an emergency meeting of our executive board. And so we all get there, and he said, well, what are we going to do about this? And we're all saying, we're only here because you opened your, anyway. So we addressed the problem, and it was something that I'd been thinking about. But I said, look, you can't rely on any particular country to make sure its athletes are clean. You can't rely on any particular sport to make sure its athletes are clean. And the consensus view is that the IOC is too weak at that stage to control the Olympic movement. So I said, I think what we need is an independent international agency, because it's got to be international, that is not controlled by any of the stakeholders, any particular stakeholders. So we ended up with a 50-50 match, governments and the sports movement. And that's been the model that has worked ever since. It was a whole new idea. It had never been even conceived before that. And that's why I say that you get the opportunity. You say, look, here's the chance. Everybody's upset about both the IOC and cycling and so on. Here's an opportunity. What can we do to change that whole paradigm? And so the result of that was WADA. It looks easy in retrospect, but at the time, you had to get the mix of governments, which, as you know, is all left, right, totalitarian democracies, whatever it is, all with their own political and sport agendas. You have the IOC as the sort of the international head of the Olympic movement. You have, using today's figures, you have 207 different national Olympic committees, all with varying degrees of knowledge about doping and, frankly, varying degrees of commitment to doping-free sport. And then you have the international federations who are like little fiefdoms, very jealous of their power and control over their particular sports. And they don't want any influence. And they too have differing levels of commitment to the sport, a clean sport. So anyways, all right, well, the idea of this agency or independent organization resonated. And we said, all right, but it's too big a step for us to do. We need to call a world conference on doping in sport. Invite all of the governments, all of the federations, all of the NOCs, athlete representatives, coaches, international agencies familiar with drugs. And we'll have a conference in Lausanne, which, as you know, or if you're involved in the Olympic movement, that's the center of the universe. self-declared. But so we had this in February of 1999. And there was a consensus. Nobody wanted to say no, which is a good position to be in. Called together, we had the Lausanne Declaration, which was to say it's a good idea. We'll put something together. And I remember going to the governments who were there. We had originally thought they should have just one block of control, which is a 1/6, and they threw a massive temper tantrum and wanted 50-50. And I said, well, let me go and talk to Sam Ranch about this. And I said, they want to have 50-50. Said, I told you we should never have had this conference. And I said, no, actually, it's a better idea than mine. He said, why? He said, well, if they have 50% of the control, they can damn well pay 50% of the costs, which otherwise we were going to have to pay. And I said, and the other thing, I came back and I said, so you don't like my idea? No. Do you really insist on 50%? Never mind the at least. 50%, yes. I said, you got it. What? I said, no, it's a better idea than mine. I said, only two things. What's that? I said, we don't have the time to waste that you people do in your international treaty. We've got to be in the field. January 1st, 2000, to start testing for the Sydney Games. We can do that. We get it. And to give credit where credit is due, by November of 1999, they had all that in place. What's the second thing? I said, well, the second thing is if you have 50% of the control, you can damn well pay 50% of the costs. Oh. I mean, our budget at that time might have been $8 million a year. I mean, it's a rounding error in the city of Montreal budget, much less 206 countries. And they wrung their hands about that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, we don't need your help to spend our money. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll pay the first 2 years. $8 million. We'd already set aside $25 million, so I saved us $17 million. And again, to give credit where credit is due, they developed a continental formula. 20% for the Americas, 22% for Asia, Europe was 45 or 46%. Anyway, and Africa, we said they've got to pay something. It's not going to be very much, but so all of Africa is, I think, 1.5% of the total budgets. But we put that in place, and it's served us very well. And the problem we had with the public authorities when we got WADA going is they think financial management is cutting down on the expenses. And I have to say, no. You want to increase this because we've got a big worldwide problem here, which can't be managed on $25 million a year. You've got to find ways to increase the budget. Anyway, there's the amount of violin playing from the public authorities was pretty interesting.
So you were at the center of that.
Yeah.
And how did it come about that WADA was based in Montreal?
I've never been entirely sure. I think there's two things. One is Lausanne was overly greedy, I thought, and they wanted everything to be in Lausanne. And they said, no, this has got to be an arm's length organization, and having an Atlantic Ocean between you and Lausanne is not a bad idea. And there may have been, to some degree, a consolation prize for the about to be elections for the IOC. So, but it's worked out very well. And Montreal is a very international city, and it's used to dealing with these things. It's as you'll find out as your practices expand, if you're interested in sports law, that there's a lot of sports stuff going on in Montreal, and to the extent that it's all international, the bilingual capacity coming out of Montreal is, and Patrice can certainly speak to that, is a very, very valuable asset, as is for those of you who had both the common law and the civil law training. You know, a lot of the world is civil law, and the Anglo-American is common law based. But anyway, so I think that has led to it, and I think the quality of the staff that we recruited was very good. I mean, I think within less than a year, we had all of the senior directors in place, and many of them are still with us.
So, shooting forward to today, we've seen recent tensions between WADA and some national anti-doping organizations such as USADA, CHINADA, with the recent case of the Chinese swimmers. Would you like to comment on the recent developments?
Sure. There have been two big issues here. One has been with Russia. So anyone who says that we favor the superpowers, my answer to that is go to Russia and ask them what they think. And as far as China is concerned, we were the ones that pursued Sun Yang, the Chinese swimmer, and so China knows that there's no deal there, and there never has been. I mean, we're really the only independent agency that's actually concerned with clean sport. There are pockets here and there, but the only international organization is WADA. So the particular case of the Chinese is that there was a swimming meet back in 2021 in China. Brought swimmers from all parts of China, different coaches and so on. They all come down, or not all, but 23 of them came down with a positive test, low volume for a heart medication that's on the prohibited list. And they looked at it and they couldn't figure out what it was. And some swimmers were positive on Friday, negative on Saturday, positive again on Sunday. And the consensus was that it was a contamination, like some of the clenbuterol stuff in cycling and so on. And they investigated. The Chinese reported, by the way, they reported negative, there were adverse findings on all of the athletes. So they weren't hiding anything. It was in the COVID era. They could easily have hidden it if they wanted. There's they just don't report it, and you couldn't get into or out of China from the outside. So anyway, they played that by the book, and they said it's got to be contamination. There's no, you don't, from all of these various provinces, you don't have trace amounts of the same drug that show up during this particular meet. And so they reported this to WADA. It's in our database. They reported it to World Aquatics, which is the old FINA. And everyone looked at it and said, well, it's got all of the hallmarks of a contamination where there's no fault on the part of the athletes, no intention to dope. It's contamination, not active doping. All our experts looked at it, the scientific and so forth. The World Aquatics did the same thing, came to independent conclusions that yes, it's all the indications are contamination. None of them are doping. And so they didn't charge them with doping. And our legal experts said, look, if you charge them with this, the case is not going to be heard by CAS until after Beijing is over. So you're not going to do anything. Nobody is going to say that there was fault on the part of the athletes. There's no evidence to that. So you're not going to get a conviction. You're going to waste a lot of time and money. So no charges of doping. And that's fine. Nobody has actually disagreed with that except for the United States Anti-Doping Agency, which has given us a lot of trouble. They gave us a lot of trouble over the Russians, hundreds of cases that we prosecuted, and the USADA didn't do anything about that. This is the case with the Chinese. All of a sudden, the U.S. is no longer as mad at Russia as it is at China, and so all of a sudden, that's a year and a half later, almost 2 years from the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. I mean, it's just nuts. And so we've been in a kind of a skirmish with USADA, and I think once we get the report of the independent inquiry, part of which is due prior to the games in Paris, to try and get that off the table for the Paris Games. We're going to look at what recourses we have against USADA, because it's done nothing but try to convince the U.S. government not to make its contributions. And then if the U.S. government doesn't make its contributions, they're probably in the order of $2 million, the IOC doesn't match it. And so they say, we can really cripple the actions of WADA if we get to do that. And then they're doing the same thing now with the Chinese. I've never understood exactly what their end game is here, because they don't seem to realize that if WADA can't do a good and thorough job, the risk to U.S. athletes of competing against athletes who are doped goes up. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot to make some kind of a political point, the outcome of which is never clear. And it's probably too soon to start gaming that out, but the U.S. has Olympic Games coming up in 2028, the next games after Paris. There's been a lot of damage done in the with the Russians and the Chinese, and I think that could put those games at risk, which USADA hasn't figured out. And the other thing is, if you're in the sport business, and those of you who've competed or coached will know that one of the key skill sets that good athletes have is to be able to shed doubts. You think of what you want to do, and you don't worry about what might happen. And so you get all your athletes thinking about whether they're going to be against doped athletes. That's bad for their performance. And they start focusing on the wrong things instead of, I'll do what I can control, and we'll see where the chips come down. So why USADA as a sport-related organization would try and weaken or destroy the credibility of WADA is not yet clear.
Without oversimplifying the issue, I think that what they're asking for from WADA is a little bit more transparency, but at the same time, being an arbitrator, the cases that come before arbitration are only those cases where there's accusations for an ADRV. And there's a lot of things that we don't see as arbitrators, because not that it's hidden, but it just doesn't pass the smell test with the labs and the scientific committees. So, sure, I think USADA is asking the question, why was there not an ADRV to have been appealed and then disposed of through the due process? But my answer, and like I said, I'm not initiated, but my answer would be that, well, there was no ADRV because the homework was done behind closed doors. And of course, it wasn't disclosed because you need to preserve the confidentiality of the athletes, being the subject of an investigation, but ultimately not resulting in an ADRV, an anti-doping rule violation. So that's my perspective from what I see, and there's a lot of cases. There are some cases that, as an arbitrator, you'll never hear the names, but where I have concluded that the athlete did not bear any fault and walked away without an ADRV. And you'll never hear about those cases because they're hidden, and for good reason.
Yeah, they're confidential. They're not
confidential.
Hidden.
They're hidden / confidential. But there's nothing to hide, actually, because you need to preserve the reputation of the athletes. But what do you make of that? USADA understands very well how the system is made. I understand their political stance that they want more transparency or fair competition between China and the U.S. Let's call it that way.
Well, yes. I mean, it tends to be kind of binary with the U.S. We hate Russia, we hate China, we're perfect, and that's a hard cocktail to swallow. So, I would say one of the rhetorical questions would be, how would you like it if the swimmers here happened to be in the United States.
Mhm.
And somebody put their names out there in the public with all of the privacy restrictions and so on that apply. How would you like that? And so you can see why they would do that. And the idea is that you got to be fair. You got to be even-handed, but you got to be fair, and not put some 15, 16, 17-year-old kid in the public limelight on something that would never have gone forward and produce an actionable positive test. So it's a mix. That's the reason you have WADA, because it has no alliances with anyone, and unlike particular national interests, which you find with by country. That's why you needed WADA in the first place.
Let's talk about Russia and the Russian anti-doping agency.
Yeah.
They've been suspended for what, now almost 10 years now?
It's coming. I think we suspended in 2015. Yeah.
2015, yeah. So we're coming in
After that investigation that I chaired.
And you chaired the investigation panel of 3 with Rich McLaren and who was the third one?
Gunter Younger. Who's now our investigations and intelligence.
So 9 years later, do you think Russia will come back into the fold for anti-doping? I mean, let's push aside the war in Ukraine. That's another matter, but for doping?
Well, certainly on the anti-doping side, in order to get back into the Olympics and international competition governed by most of the international federations, they're going to have to be compliant. And if they're not compliant, they don't get to sit on any committees. Their athletes can't enter. They're not going to be eligible for elected positions and so forth. So they've got to find a way to get back. And what we've been doing, 2 things. One is trying to train the anti-doping organization people in Russia on what to do and how to get some degree of separation, which is not easy in Russia.
And how's that training going?
That's what got them in trouble in the first place. And you have to remember, all these doping programs are not organized by the sports movement. They're organized by the state. It was like the old East Germany days. They were designed, administered, and enforced by the political authorities, who have far more power and muscle than the sports organization. So it's going to be a challenge for the Russians, but my personal view is that international sport is too important to Russia for them to be excluded. I think at one point they say, "Oh, we got to be careful. We don't, we can't have the Olympics without the big countries like Russia and China and so on." And it's actually the reverse. They cannot afford to be excluded from them because they don't have a good anti-doping program, properly administered. So it's if you're satisfied with where you're going and the sort of the ethical values that you're trying to support, it's a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. What you have to do is build the bridge out to say, here's how you get back. We'd love to have you back. I mean, right now you can't come back because you're really bad guys. I mean, when we did the investigation about the sample switches and so on in Russia, it was just unbelievable. They were handing clean urine. Actually, I'll go back one second. The commission I chaired, we had 2 question marks at the end of it because we were only allowed to focus on athletics, track and field. 2 questions. I said, we got all these reports of athletes coming with sort of brown paper bags containing fluid and depositing them at various offices and so on. What is that? Are they bringing samples, when they've been on whatever the program is, to see what their clearance times might be? Anyway, so question mark. And the other is, why is the FSB, which is the successor to the KGB, why are there FSB officers in the laboratory? But they got no technical skills at all. Not sure. Anyway, the next examination or investigation showed what it was. They were there because they were managing just their headquarters in Sochi were just on the other side of the wall from the lab where all the samples were. So if Boris had a sample taken and they thought they would go back to the lab and get Boris's clean urine that he had dropped off a few months ago, put that through the wall, take the bad stuff away and throw it. It was all that kind of stuff. And then they faked all of the computer records. And one of the problems we had was if we were going to prosecute, and Patrice will know because he's heard a lot more. I never heard doping appeals because of people said, "Oh, President of WADA, have we got any chance at all of getting off?" But they were faking the data, and we had to get the data from the lab. And in order to do that, we had to show them a road to reinstatement, which involved making that data available, that we would go and get it and examine it before we took it away. And I remember we gave them a deadline of, say, December 31st of a year, probably 2016 maybe. And if they didn't provide the data in a useful form, and we found all the things that where the messages in the programming, delete this as soon as you've changed the values that we said December 31st or you're gone. Anyway, December 31st comes and goes. On January 1st, they got a letter saying you're suspended. The deal's off the table. That produced a little action in the next couple of weeks. So we went over and took all the stuff and came back and saw what they had done to the data. It was just absolutely outrageous. So that's been part of the re-education of Russian anti-doping officials.
So just closing off on the first topic, which is WADA and NATO's. Regarding RUSADA, any outlook on reintegration, do you think, or do you feel there's any progress being made?
Well, I think there's progress being made. I mean, it's separating church and state here.
Yeah.
And I mean, the CAS arbitration panel that dealt with the WADA recommendation to suspend Russia for 4 years, they reduced it down to 2. Was a disappointment to us, but if they can come back onto that and then work their way back into the international federations and the IOC, it's doable, and with good faith you can make things happen pretty quickly. But so far we haven't seen much of that.
All right, let's talk about hosting Olympic Games. So we've seen in recent years that not many cities have raised their hand to host Olympic Games. And actually the IOC a few years ago decided to award 3 consecutive games to Paris, Milan, and Los Angeles just to sort of secure. But we've seen a resurgence of Olympic cities raising their hand now to host Olympic Games in the 30s. You went through all this. You were part of the backroom discussions. How was it with the IOC? Were they in panic mode or not? And are they popping the champagne now?
Neither extreme. I'd say what we did figure out was that the old system whereby you got a set of criteria, say here, we're going to have a session in 2.5 years, you come and bid, and winner take all. And that was very unsatisfactory, and it led to lots of excesses in the facilities requested or demanded by international federations. The basketball federation wanted a gymnasium with a seating capacity of 16,000, which would have been filled twice in its entire existence. once for the finals of the Olympics and once for the finals of the Women's Olympics. After that, 6,000 would be more than, but the cost and the maintenance of the bigger facility was prohibitive. So that that dampened the enthusiasm of a lot. Some unverified reporting dampened it a bit. You know, out of God knows where. There was a newspaper report that the Sochi Olympics cost $50 billion. Well, there would maybe be that kind of an investment in what they were trying to do was to build up a winter recreational and competitive environment in the Caucasus. And all of a sudden, you know, Norway was about to bid for the another edition of the Winter Games, which they'd staged in 1994, I guess. And they said, well, we can't afford $50 billion. See, what kind of idiots are feeding your politicians this kind of information? You know it's not going to cost that. You've already got all the facilities here. How could anybody in their right mind think it would cost $50 billion? But once these things get out there, it's hard to dislodge them. And misinformation or disinformation is very much a flavor of the month in this period of our lives. So we said maybe the thing to do is not have a bid, winner take all. Let's invite potentially interested countries to come and talk to us, and we can figure out what you need out of the Olympics. You can figure out what we need in order to stage them, and let's do this on a piecemeal basis, and we can do this by consensus. We've got a committee to look at Winter Games candidates and Summer Games candidates, 2 committees, and it's a discussion and negotiation as to what's good for both sides of the equation. Well, that's been a lot more popular and palatable, and it's encouraged a number of countries to come forward and say, well, if we can make it work, you know, let's see how close we can get before we decide. I mean, on the you know, we actually, Canada shot itself in both feet. The IOC wanted to have a number of games, you know, in the they were begging Calgary to host the games again, and again, they have the experience, they know what to do. Calgary's city council, in a protracted moment of idiocy, said no, too expensive. So then we did the same thing for Vancouver. All right, 30 years from Vancouver, do the 2030 games. You're a natural. They were fantastic games. Just as that was coming to a head, they had an election in British Columbia, and the NDP got in. No, we're interested in housing. Well, there's a lot of housing you have to build for the Olympic Games. This is a great opportunity for you. And we have an Indigenous-led bid. This is textbook stuff. No, they wouldn't even meet with the Indigenous community. So we'd have had games out to, you know, 2016. We're good for 8, 10. 8, 10, 12 is Brisbane.
Yep.
And
22.
2022, yeah. So I think it's a better process. It will produce better results. It'll make sure that you can have a lot of these discussions privately. You know, you don't have to go to the newspaper to say we're going to Lausanne to, you know, talk about the XX games. And I think we'll be fine there. I think we've got good hosts coming up. Paris will be spectacular one way or another. I mean, you're never entirely sure whether it's going to be fantastic good or fantastic awful, but I think the preparations would suggest that it should be fantastic good. Brisbane will do a very good job. Milano Cortina has some infrastructure issues, which we knew, and
They still have time.
yeah, probably they go somewhere else. Yeah.
The last 3 games were held in Asia, and the next ones this summer will be in Europe. Do you think that will contribute to perhaps shedding more positive on the IOC from the Western world, of course?
Yeah. On the other hand, I think it's great that we were able to have 3 very successful games in Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, that destroyed a lot of myths that were out there, and we've talked about the IOC being Eurocentric. It really is, and it's just inconceivable that that they don't get more than their share of the games, and so we're going to see some of that now. But I remember when we were bidding for 2012, there were 2 bookends on the 5 finalist candidates. One was Russia, and the other was New York, the States. Round 1, Russia's gone. Round 2, New York is gone, and the remaining 3 are from where? Guess where? Europe, London, Madrid, and Paris. I guess it was not Paris.
Paris was there, yeah.
Anyway, so that's what you can do when you got all the votes.
Yeah.
So.
All right, here's a deeper one. In your view, does the IOC have a responsibility to favor countries that respect human rights? That's a heavy one.
It's hard to disagree with that being a universal objective that you do when you go to the Olympic Games. You're all together in the Olympic Village. You're eating the same place. You're living practically on top of each other. You're training together. You're competing together, and there really isn't any discrimination involved there. One of the outlying concerns was the gender equality, and I think for the first time, Paris will be 50-50, number of events, number of athletes, and that's a big step forward. And there's still parts of the world that are uncomfortable with that kind of a theory, but we're there, and it's once you get there, it's going to be hard to back away from it. But to be out actively involved in the politics of discrimination, you've got to be careful. You can't be all things to all people. We're a full complement of the IOC is 115 members. And we've got a pretty good staff now, which is can deliver a lot of professionalism that we didn't have. When I was doing television negotiations, I did the negotiations. I remember when Sam Ranch called me and said, "Deke," it was Deke. "You're now chairman of the television negotiations committee." And I said, "But I don't know anything about television." And he said, "Well, none of us do. But television is going to be our most important revenue source for the foreseeable future. We've got to figure out what to do. We've got to get involved earlier on it." The IOC it was so risk adverse that it said to the organizing committees, "You negotiate the television rights. We don't want to have any contractual thing, and we'll take a share of whatever you get." And they didn't pay any attention to television, say for Calgary, until the Sarajevo games were finished. Well, by that time, the ship has probably left the harbor, and so we said no. We'll have the negotiations for Calgary before Sarajevo. Before. Oh, He said no. We got to do that. So we had them, I think, less than a month before. So, and we had a kind of an auction bid, and I remember one of the big things was Calgary said, "Well, listen, Mark McCormick is IMG. big sports guru at the time, says we can get $208 million, which is more than twice or two and a half times what Sarajevo got. But he says we should not negotiate before Sarajevo. We should wait, kind of an anal retentive approach. The longer you can hold it, the better it is. And we said, well, we think that's dead wrong, because the United States is going to do very, very poorly in Sarajevo, and that will depress the market. So we think we should do it beforehand. And they said, well, Mark McCormick says we can get $208 million. And I said, okay, tell you what, you give us our share of $200 million. We'll round it down. And you can have the negotiations whenever you want. Oh, well, all of a sudden they say, oh, we're just a poor little organizing committee. We can't afford to take a risk. Sorry, folks, you can't have it both ways. Either you negotiate when we want, or you negotiate when you want, but you have to guarantee our share. So with a lot of, kicking the carpet and so on, they said, well, we'll do it first. And before Sarajevo. And anyway, we got $309 million, so the grumbling stopped. And I remember my advice to them, I said, hire a young lawyer, give the young lawyer a copy of the contract, and have the young lawyer read it every single day, because these people have paid too much. It was like the old Mickey Mouse thing, turn off the machine, and because they will be trying to find excuses to reduce the rights fees. And anyway, we, by the grace of God and lots of good luck, we didn't run across anything like that. But we did a number of things, and this was something else that organizing committees couldn't have done. We said to the networks, what do you need to make this more interesting to you? And they said, well, we'd like to have the same schedule as the summer games, which is 3 weekends. Right? An opening on Friday night and finishing on 2 Sundays thereafter. And I said, well, the winter program's a little thinner than the summer games. In those days, you only had 6 or 7 international federations as opposed to 30. And they said, well, you could add some events. Duh. Why didn't we think of that, So we went to a couple of the international federations, said, would you be interested in having more exposure for your sport? Boom. They were on it like a... So we gave them more programming time and so forth, which certainly increased the interest, and said, what can we do to make it better? And so that was a different attitude from sort of sitting there and say, what did the organizing committee negotiate? And give us our 10% or whatever the number was.
Dick, we could go on for hours, but I want to touch on the third topic because time flies, and I want to leave some time so that you can all discuss between each other before we're done. And there's some great sushi there and some drinks, and don't hesitate to just go and serve yourself. You're not going to disrupt the discussion. So I want to talk about development of sports arbitration for lawyers. Dick, you've been a sports arbitrator with the STRCC. You were at one time, or still are, with CAS as well?
I was, but CAS, in a flagrant disregard of international rules and so on, says if you're 80, you're toast.
Are you over 80? Yeah, I know. My friend Yves Fortier had to suffer the same problem. But you're still an arbitrator with the STRCC for the past 20 years, and you've rendered over, I counted a couple of years ago, I think you were over 75 decisions, which makes you one of the top decision makers in sports in Canada, just with the STRCC, of course, with other matters. Many lawyers have argued before you. Have you seen an evolution in legal representation, and what are the top picks or top traits of a litigator appearing before you that you've identified that could be of some counsel to the councils here?
Well, basically, a lawyer should be an officer of the court. In this case, it's the SDRCC, and you're trying to get the right result at the most expeditious pace and the lowest cost. It's not always the way lawyers think, and there are two classes. There are lawyers that are clearly looking for a solution and an outcome that is affordable and quick. And there are others whose objectives seem to be to delay, just to delay. People get tired, people get bored, evidence is lost, it becomes moot at a certain stage. So moving cases along is one of the main responsibilities of the arbitrator. I've got one going now that I've had 2 jurisdictional arbitrations. It's on the basis of that.
On the same case?
Same case.
Oh.
There's a reasonable apprehension of bias. So I haven't heard a word of evidence. Not a word. I mean, how they would come to that conclusion, I don't know, but neither of the jurisdictional arbitrators did either. So you're trying to be helpful and not and know your case, plead it properly. In fact, if you're a really good lawyer, you pay quite a lot of attention to drafting the complaint, because quite often the point you end up deciding the case on weren't even mentioned in the complaint. They sort of evolved as the matter progressed, and so that's a little more discipline there. And I think the SDRCC itself, through its board, has to keep looking at experiences, real life experiences, to see what parts of the code are being abused as a result of lawyers reading it carefully. And but it's a very good service. I've always been very pleased with the quality of the judgments that come out from people that are not necessarily deeply immersed in sport itself. I mean, a smart person can figure out something.
So appearing before the SCRCC, you'll have some athletes who, in many cases, will be at a financial disadvantage, either against the CCES or their national federation. Any hints of solution at sort of leveling the playing field there?
Well, I think the mediation process is a very useful tool in that respect, to get an experienced mediator to find out what the facts are, to elicit from the athletes involved what do they really want. In a carding case, do you insist on getting 100% of whatever the quote is for that, or could you get along with 50%? And that sort of thing. Is it something where you can negotiate on the sanction? And so a good mediator can be very, very helpful in that. And then we've got some very good mediators who know their business and know what they're supposed to do. I've got a case where I'm the arbitrator, but the mediation has now gone on for almost a year. The mediator, I think, has a pretty good view of where this is likely to come out, and is trying to get the parties to say, listen, find some way to agree on a statement or an apology or a sanction, whatever it may be, but don't go to court. Which, and as we all know,
it takes some patient lawyers as well.
Yeah, well, as you know, litigation is the outcome when reasonable people can't agree. And it should be a last resort, not the first. There's not, you don't go in and shoot the first hostage and say, all right, now that I have your attention. So it's, I think that is a very useful element in the compulsory mediation. And you don't have to do it if you're time barred or running up against a plane that's leaving tomorrow night for Paris.
I have a last question for you. We have some young lawyers here. Sometimes they come up to me, but I'd like to hear it from you. Any advice on getting into the practice of sports law, either before the SDRCC, before CAS, or the new thing that should not have been new, but Save Sport now should have been around for a long time, but some people woke up a few years ago. Any advice on how to get started in that field?
Well, you've got a couple of issues. I'd say one is are you interested in the problems involved? And there are some very interesting and subtle problems that need to be dealt with. And would you be interested in doing that, even if you couldn't monetize it the way you might like? And so if you need to do it for the money, you go where the money is. And so in the professional end, you've got a lot more money, and clubs and leagues and so on have...
Stikeman Elliott.
we don't do any sports.
Yeah.
Never did. Where are we? And you can do some volunteer work. You work for the provincial sports federations or Canadian sports. They all have legal problems. They don't have huge budgets, but you get known, and you meet. You're networking through those sorts of involvements will take you in directions you might not have ever thought of. And don't be afraid to do that, because it's a opportunity. I remember when I was in school, they said, opportunity doesn't knock at your door anymore. It rings the phone and asks a silly question. Anyway, but just be there, be visible, be interested, write. Get people like Patrice to put you on his program and so on, and so that you get known. Yeah. I think it's a great idea that for the SLA to have a Quebec branch. And this is a very fertile part of the world for sports and therefore for sports law.
It is. Thank you so much, Dick. We're gonna maybe go to questions now quickly. Are there any questions? Est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui ont des questions? Approchez-vous près du micro, comme ça pourra...
This is a mic for recording, right? It's not gonna...
That's right, it's going to record.
Okay.
It doesn't amplify.
I'm gonna speak louder.
It only amplifies to the world.
Okay, thank you, Dick. Thank you, Patrice, for this very fruitful discussion. My name is Paul Trinel, and among the things a couple of things that I do, I work in research at McGill University, especially in arbitration matters. And recently I've been looking at sports arbitration, and I wanted to discuss with you, Patrice and Dick, and all the eminent minds in the room, about the issue, where the question of consent in sports arbitration, in light especially of the recent decisions of the European Court of Rights, of Human Rights, for example, in Mutu and Pechtin. Some authors, I'm thinking of Antoine Duval from the Asser Institute in particular, have talked about the idea of a post-consensual arbitration, because it feels to the majority of scholars that consent in sports arbitration is maybe a bit not illusory, but sometimes a bit skewed when you think about it compared to consumers and employees that we have chosen to protect, with special measures in that regard. Sports people have even less choice when it comes to their, domain. For example, if you want to be a professional football player, you will have to deal with the FIFA statute at some point. So my question is, where do you think this could go in terms of the future of sports arbitration and CAS? I do believe that it's a good thing that we have arbitration in sports, because I don't see how it could work with domestic courts, fighting each other and all of that. So I believe arbitration is a good idea, but should we maybe move towards a model with maybe a national treaty? I know treaties are, not always easy to to put to assemble, and it's a bit of a pious vow. But yeah, I guess my question is this: like, should we recognize that consent is not the same in sports arbitration as it is in commercial arbitration? If so, what would be the consequences? Do you think that would lead to maybe some democratization or more transparency at CAS? And yeah, I'd like to have your insight. Anybody else in the room on this?
I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself then is, what is the objective here? I mean, sport it's a subset of society clearly, but one of the reasons we have the SDRCC, one of the reasons we have CAS, is because the state court system is totally unsuited to the purpose. You need quick decisions, preferably by people knowledgeable in the field. CAS and the SDRCC have a roster of qualified arbitrators, and you can choose those. I think I like the idea of, at least at a domestic level, to say, yeah, here's the deal. Disputes on carding, team selection, conduct, all these things, there is a forum, and the forum is the SDRCC. And so you know that. And it's you've got an arbitration code that says, like, we're trying to do this quickly, expeditiously, expertly, at the lowest possible cost. That's got to please everybody. And at the Olympic Games in Paris, there will be what they call an ad hoc panel of arbitrators there, who, between getting the paper on their desk and rendering a reasoned decision,
24 hours.
24 hours. Yeah. Now, try that on Superior Court in Montreal. when the lawyers have signed off and say we're ready for trial, you could be looking at 4 years before you get in front of a court. So I think the idea is to render quick, expert justice and not have jurisdictional issues as to where you go and what the outcome will be. I mean, that's one of the advantages, particularly for CAS. The New York Convention makes those judgments enforceable in the territory of every signatory. And we're getting close to pretty close to 100% at this point.
Stephen Dreimer, did you have a question or?
Not an answer, it's another question.
Okay, yeah. So we'll go with Felipe. Do you want to maybe get close to the mic, and then we'll go with.
All right. Well, I have a comment first and then a question, and I'm going to put them in that order because I think that's the order of priority. First, just allow me to say to you, Patrice, personally, thank you for putting together this organization. I know a lot of people have been involved, but this is the animating spirit and the driving force. And merci from all of us who practice in the area and care about sport, law, and administration. Merci. My question, Dick, goes to something that I know you hold dear and have held dear throughout your career. And that's integrity in the administration and adjudication of sports disputes. Where are the challenges today? All right, I know there have been challenges in the past. Where are the challenges today as regards the independence of WADA from governments or other groups, including the IOC, who control their funding? You alluded to some of that when you spoke of USADA and Travis Tigert. And the other pillar on the adjudication side, where are the challenges, if any, today to the independence of CAS as the prime adjudicative body for the Olympic movement?
Well, I would say if you've got a single arbitrator, you don't have a lot of the problems that happen when you have panels. In the case of the Russian, the Russians appoint one of the three arbitrators. So you've got, in some cases the arbitrators sometimes forget that they're arbitrators and are lawyers in the room, and that makes things awkward, but that just requires a strong chair and an independent third person. Group dynamics are quite different, and if you talk to even our members of the Supreme Court of Canada, it's not always easy to find common ground and to deal with movements to the right or left, as the case may be. So that's one of the risks. I mean, good counsel can help with that. If the questions are a little too pointed or a little too indicative of a disposition, you see.
Is WADA sufficiently independent of its stakeholders?
Yes, in the judicial side, yes.
Excellent. And CAS, in your view?
It always seemed to me to be so.
Good.
It takes, we're clearly more used to and more comfortable with the environment in which we practice law
Right.
here.
Right.
And that differs in many parts of the world.
Yes, it does.
And so that's challenging. And sometimes maybe what you have to do is, if it's a part of the world where the rules and approaches are different, you get your panels from that part of the world. And you don't send in somebody from a so-called developed country saying, no, this is the way we do it.
All right.
It doesn't work.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Stephen Dreimer. Maître Morales,
Philippe
that's going to be the last question, and then afterwards we can
Thank you for letting me.
approach. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for not only for being here, but also for writing that wonderful book about Made in Court, exposing Canada's Supreme Court judgments. I think I enjoyed it very much. Thank you much for putting it out there. I wanted to circle back the other extreme of what Stephen said about WADA. I wanted to see about the structure that you picked, that it has governments. Recently, very wealthy individual has decided that he wants to promote, Peter Thiel wants to have his parallel all drug Olympics, shall we call it. Do you think that WADA could use its government pressure to say to athletes, don't go there. This is not a good idea. Don't participate there. Because I think it's making sport a circus, which I would hate it to become.
Why don't we do this alphabetically?
Alphabetically?
Brunei?
Oh. You want me to? I mean, you're the guest today, but and you're the founder of WADA. I saw that quasi news come across about organizing, and those discussions happen in my inner circle. I have some people who are not initiated to sport or to doping in sport, and their simple comment is, let them dope. They're responsible adults, and what does it change?
Except many of them are not responsible adults.
Well, that's another.
I mean,
that's for another day.
I don't
yeah.
think Valieva was there kicking open the door of the pharmacy saying,
Correct.
"Where the fuck is my heart medicine?"
Absolutely, and my answer resembles what you've just said, or the analogy you've just given, is what kind of message are we sending our teenagers and our youth if we allow it at the top level? If you allow smoking to society, it's much more difficult to tell your teenagers not to smoke. So it's the same thing. If you allow doping even at the highest level, then the younger ones not only will be validated to dope, but their parents will have absolutely no tool to tell them not to. Of course it shifts to a public health issue, because a lot of those substances are not tested on humans. SARMs have not been tested on humans, but they're readily available on the internet. So we don't know 15, 20 years down the road what types of cancers we're going to have, or infertility issues we're going to have in society.
Yeah. One of the other things is, if you're taking 5 milligrams of substance X, I'm not going to take 5. I don't want to tie with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take 10. You're going to find out that I'm taking 10, you're going to take 20, and you get this escalation to the point where you're getting dosages that are toxic or lethal. So I think that's a very, very slippery slope that we should want to stay off.
But I would almost encourage those doping games to happen in order to awaken the governments to adopt legislation against doping. Some countries in Europe have done it. France has done it. Italy has done it. Spain has done it. Where's Canada? It's perfectly legal to dope in Canada if you're not an elite athlete. You can dope. You can buy your substance on the internet. You can't distribute it. There's other legal issues. But same thing in the United States. Perhaps the next order of agenda for the governments in North America is to adopt legislation that speaks to the population as a whole to ban doping in sports and double the penalties like they do in France when it's involving minors.
And I think it'll be interesting to see how the Safe Sport Commission that's been established with a judicial person as chair will tend to say, all right, I mean, this isn't the only problem in sport. It's a very serious one, but there are some others, and they require being dealt with.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous. And a personal thank you, Dick. This was very informative. Every time I speak with you, I learn new things. Hope we can have you back as a guest.
Anytime.
Anytime, right? Next week, what are you guys doing?